Good morning. Welcome to this Facebook Live session. My name is Oliver Wright. Facebook Live streaming from my front room in Leeds. Just as a quick introduction, big thank you to CameraWorld and Canon for inviting me here this morning to come and do a second talk on macro photography. Hi Sharon. We did a session about a week and a half ago where we were looking at photographing soap films, and we sort of did a live demonstration on that. So hopefully we've got a few people here who were on that. And one of the things that we talked about when we did that one was having a shallow depth of field. And for those of you who practiced it, I no doubt you really found that when you practiced it, that it's really hard to get the whole soap film in focus. And what we're going to talk about this morning is one way of overcoming that. So that is using a technique called stacking. Wow, a whole load of people have just said good morning and hi, and I can't possibly repeat all of them. So yeah, a massive good morning and hello to all of you guys. Now, if you are thinking I look a little bit sleepy, that is because I got up at just before 4 a.m. this morning, and I went out and I had a superb macro shoot. One of the key things with macro photography is getting out, well, for certainly my style, is getting out really early on the morning. So after we finish this Facebook Live, I am probably going to go have a sleep on the sofa for an hour. So what I'm going to do is we're going to talk about macro photography. We're going to talk about stacking with macro photography. There's two techniques that I use with stacking. One is basically using a tripod, and that's what I was doing this morning, and the other is handheld stacking. I'll explain a bit more about the differences with those, and I'll show you the equipment that I use as well. So you know, when I'm doing the stacking with the tripod, I'm using a lot more equipment, and then we're gonna go into more detail on the handheld stacking, which you don't need a lot of equipment for. Basically, you just need a camera and a lens. And I am going to try and do a live demonstration of a handheld stack on this. See if you can see it there. This J feather, but you can do it. You can do it on anything really. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the images off the camera, I'm going to stick them onto my computer here, and I will show you how you do the stack with software as well, because it's really quite simple. I mean, a lot of people sort of see stacking as a bit of it's really complicated, but it really isn't. And the basic premise with stacking is you basically you are moving where which part of the image is in focus. So there's various different ways of doing this. I just saw somebody pop up say they were an Olympus user. So some of the modern Olympus cameras and some of the new Canon mirrorless cameras have sort of inbuilt stacking ways of doing things. But I'm sort of going to we're going to talk about the sort of the old-fashioned way on this, because not all cameras have a way of doing this within the camera. So one thing I just wanted to cover before we go any further was, so a lot of people entered the competition that we ran with CameraWorld the other week, and I have been through those images. So I just wanted to go through who was the winning images, so the top three. So first prize goes to Eddie Montgomery. Second prize was to Jay Brown, and third was to Sue Sayer. So you'll all be getting an email from CameraWorld with your vouchers attached to those. And just to let you know, on the back of doing this one, Canon and CameraWorld are going to be offering certain discounts. So I know somebody from CameraWorld is going to send a message out in the messages as we go through this. Now, there are loads of different things going on the screen here. So somebody from CameraWorld is also going to be logged on. So if I see a question pop up and I can answer it there and then, I will do, but as I'm going to be sort of backwards and forwards, I may not catch all of the questions as they come up, but hopefully the person from CameraWorld will. If it may be that we answer them after the event as well, so but hopefully we will get to all of those. So let me just show you the results that I got from this morning. So now this morning, I mentioned that I did, you know, I used two techniques. So one is using a tripod, and that's what I did this morning because I went out at, I set off from the house at about 4:40, got to the site for about 5 o'clock, and you know it was really quite cold. It was about 8 degrees centigrade, so everything was staying really, really still. And because the temperature had dropped beyond what's called a dew point, there was quite a lot of dew on the insects that I found. So let me just show you. Oh. Now, these are literally hot off the press from this morning, and I haven't sorted them all out into So this was the first one of a robberfly. Sorry, not a robberfly, a hoverfly. If I zoom into this, so you can see here's the hoverfly, and it's all covered in dew. Now this is the stacked image. Let me see if I can move this a little bit closer. Let's see if we can get it focused on there. So this is a stacked image now. And you can see, you should hopefully be able to see that the whole hoverfly is in focus, and it's all covered in this really beautiful dew as well. Now if I come out of this one and go to a single image, yeah, there's a good example. So if I look at this one, it's not going to be so easy to see, but if I go to full size, now if you look at this one, only a small portion of the hoverfly is in focus. But if I go through the images, it's not going to like doing this zoomed in on a big screen, but yeah, there it goes. Yeah, it's really not going to like that. These are large files, so my poor computer's getting a come on, computer. But basically, on the single images, the plane of focus is really, really thin. So here, this dewdrop here is in focus, part of the eye's in focus, but the front of these legs is out of focus, etc. Well, if I go to come on, iMac, there we go. So if I go to this one, pretty much the whole hoverfly is in focus, and that's because I've stacked this. Jump around, a few technical problems here. Janet, what were the tech problems? So hopefully that shows that particular example. Let's just have a quick look at another one. It was a very good morning for macro photography this morning. So here is the same hoverfly. Oops. Head on. See if I can get it to expose a bit more for the screen. It's not really liking it, but if I zoom into this again, so this is a stacked image using a tripod. Let me move away from those because it's not right. Let me just move this back across here. So I just sort of wanted to show you some sort of live examples of things that I literally did this morning. So somebody asked me what lens I used there. So this morning, because that robberfly there was taken at 5 times magnification, so I was using the MPE 65. And I'm just going to show you in a second the equipment that I was using this morning, so you can see exactly what I was using. I lost my train of thought. Right, get it back on. Yeah, so this morning I was doing things with a tripod. Let me just go that way so we've got less of that harsh curtain in view. So this morning I was using a tripod because things weren't moving. It was early morning. But if I was to say go back out after this call had finished, everything's going to be much more active and is going to be moving around and not staying still. So it'd be really difficult to do macro photography of things like jumping spiders, ruby-tailed wasps, all of those type of things when they become very, very active. So that's when I do handheld stacking. So just to give you an example of that, how do you get time to before the insects move? Yeah, Neil, so the key thing to that is getting up really early in the morning. So this hoverfly just couldn't fly because it hasn't warmed up enough yet. So this time of year, unfortunately, with some sunrise, I think was 4:26 or 4:30 this morning. So you really do have to get out early. You know, you want to be on the site just around sunrise time, basically. So you've really sort of got to get out early. But on the other side, if I was photographing something like a ruby-tailed wasps, I can never find in the morning. You know, they're hidden around. They're hidden away during the morning times and they only come out during the day. Please twist your screen towards the camera. I'll be going back to some more screen stuff in a minute. So if I'm photographing something like jumping spiders, for example, that is when I'm doing things handheld. So just to quickly show you an example of that, and I will move the camera closer to the screen. So, let me find a relevant shot. So here's a jumping spider, which has predated a fly. And this jumping spider was very, very active. And therefore, you know, if I'd have tried to use a tripod, etc., you know, the jumping spider would have moved. So that's an example of where I would do a handheld stack, and that's what we're going to do the demo on. So I'm just going to show you the equipment that I used this morning when I was doing. Let me drop the height of this a little bit. So let's position that so you can see everything. So this is sort of showing you the equipment I was using this morning. So I've got everything set up on a rigid tripod. This is a Benro Mach 3 tripod. I was using an Enduro 5-way head. They're both really good products, but you know, any tripod and any tripod head would use. The key thing, so I was actually using a Canon 5D Mark IV this morning, and then I was using this lens here, which is a Canon MPE 65mm. So this lens allows me to go from 1x to 5x magnification. The other key things I was using is, here I've got what's called a macro rail, and this is what I was using to go backwards and forwards towards the hoverfly. So if I just move this dial, the camera goes backwards. If I move the dial this way, the camera goes forwards. If I'm doing a tripod work, I will also use a remote release. That's really important because I don't want to press the button on the camera up here, because if I'm shooting at 5x magnification and I touch the camera, it's going to induce sort of wobble into the system, and that's not going to work very well. So I use a remote release, And this thing here, this is called a Wimberley Plan. And I only started using one of these last year, and it's a really, really good device. So it clips onto a tripod, and it's basically, let's see if I can show you this way. It has a little clamp on the end, even though it's called a clamp, and then it's full of foam in here. So I think you better start again as people can't sign in. I think we've got quite a lot of people, 215 people on it, so I think there's plenty of people signed in. Let me just keep with this. This thing is called a Wimberley Plan. And basically what it allows me to do is, if there is a breath of wind, it makes this type of photography really, really difficult. So what you can do with this Wimberley Plan is you don't have to be destructive on things, because it's got a foam within the clamp. Is I just sort of tighten up that around a piece of grass or whatever the subject was on. I can tighten it up, position the camera, and then I start my photography. But I'm going to move away from this tripod setup, because that one's, you need quite a lot of equipment to do that. Not everybody's got that equipment, so we are going to cover the handheld side of things. Now, it's much, move that out of the way. Hopefully the dog doesn't come running over and charge into that tripod, and hopefully the postman doesn't arrive either, otherwise you're going to hear my dog barking. So I'm going to move on to handheld stacking, because for that one you really don't need lots of equipment. So for the demonstration I am just going to use my trusty Canon 5D Mark IV, which I have had for years now. And I have got the Canon Macro 100mm L lens. This is a fantastic macro lens. I mean, I have had mine for over 10 years now. But literally, you could, you can use any macro lens, or if you don't have a macro lens, what you can also do is you can buy some extension tubes. And extension tubes go onto the camera, in between the camera and the lens, and they effectively move the lens away from the sensor. So what happens from there is, when you take the image and the light comes through the lens, as the light, because you've moved the lens further away from the sensor, as the light travels to the sensor, the image is magnified onto the sensor. So extension tubes are a really good way of sort of turning any lens into a macro lens. They basically reduce the minimum focusing distance. So they are a really good and cheap, effective way of getting things to be more magnified. So what we are going to do now is I am going to have to reposition this again a little bit. We're going to try and do a handheld stack on this feather. So I'm going to just take a clamp. I'm going to put the feather on the table. I'm going to move this out of the way. Move that out of the way, make everything as clear as possible. Let's get this right in here. So hopefully that's going to give us a view. This is the thing with streaming these in your front room, sort of in this new situation we're in, and you're using just using a phone to do the streaming. It's a little bit fiddly, so thank you for bearing with me. So I am just going to sort of cover settings now. So my key starting point when I am doing a stack, so whether it be sort of this jumping spider over here, or this feather down here, my key starting point is always going to be shutter speed. Pull it out. I wonder actually if I open the curtains. No, I am going to have to open the curtains in a minute to when I do the stack. The difficulty is, it's when you do these Facebook Lives, it tends to be a really, really bright day. I wonder, just bear with me 1 second, there could be something I can shift across here. Just bear with me, I have a large print I'm going to try and block out a little bit of sun with. Hopefully that's not going to fall over on me. A quick bit of improvisation. Just get rid of that. So where were we? So go back onto shutter speed. Yeah, that was a very quick bit of improvisation, and now we have a giant damselfly just here. So with handheld stacking, you are going to be hand holding the camera system. So it's really important that you have enough shutter speed to be able to handhold in a certain situation. So if you were, if you were out doing landscape photography or portrait photography and you were using a normal lens and a full frame camera, so say you were shooting at 50mm, the average rule of thumb is that you would have to use a 50th of a second to be able to handhold the image and the image to be sharp. That's a sort of a key way of looking at it. But when you're using a macro lens, the image is magnified. The image is magnified, and therefore you tend to need slightly faster shutter speeds to be able to compensate for that. Now I'm going to be using a 100mm macro lens. Generally I would say with a macro lens, if you're shooting at about the minimum focusing distance, you're probably going to need about 150th of a second. But it all depends on how well and how steady you can hold the camera. So key things with it though is you're definitely going to want the stabilizer on the camera lens. If it has one, you're definitely going to want that to be turned on. So I'm just going to turn that on, and I'm going to turn the focus system off, because I don't want the camera trying to focus on this situation. I want to be controlling where the depth of field, which part of the image is in focus. So I have moved that to minimum focusing distance. Let's turn the camera on. Now, normally I would shoot this on raw files, but because I want to do the demonstration on the computer afterwards, I have just put this to medium-sized JPEGs. Otherwise, it's going to be really difficult, and it's going to take a long time to when we go back onto the computer screen. Let me just try to position it that way. Don't worry, I will sort the lighting for the computer screen for when we go back onto the computer. At the moment, what's on the computer screen is not important. Really, the important bit is going to be just down here. So like I said, the key thing is about getting the shutter speed. So let's stick the shutter speed up to an 80th of a second, because I think I can handhold it still enough to be able to get a shot that's going to work at an 80th of a second. So I'm going to have to put the ISO up to 3200, and I'm going to have to bring the aperture right down to about 5. Now normally this would give me enough light, but I am going to have to move this print to be able to do this, because that is not giving us enough light at the moment. So let me just rejig things around again, and I will get it working. So I haven't actually got to the shutter speed yet, Chris. I've put it on an 80th of a second for now, but when I look through the viewfinder, that's going to be massively underexposed because I've blocked all of the light. So I'm going to have to open that light back up, which may mean I have to play around with things a little bit and improvise. Just bear with me 1 second. To open that curtain up. Actually, with the curtain open, that does actually work better anyway. So let's get back down to here. So what you may notice is there are things in the background here, but because we're going to be shooting with a macro lens at a minimum focusing distance, they are effectively going to sort of disappear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get down and start looking through the viewfinder, but the key thing I'm going to be looking at when I look through the viewfinder is this exposure meter here. So you want to be, you roughly want to have that in the middle around the 0 point. Let me go backwards and forwards. So yeah, now I'm looking at the exposure meter. I'm looking at the J feather, and the exposure meter was bang in the middle. So, and that's a nicely exposed image. So what I would do is, if I'm assessing a scene and I'm seeing that jumping spider with the fly, I would, I'd fire a test shot. I would try and get my settings right, and now I've got those settings correct. So let me just run through what those settings are. They are 1/80th of a second, f5, and ISO 3200. Ideally, I'd want to use it on less than ISO 3200, because the higher you go with the ISO, obviously the more noise there is, but we're shooting inside here. If I was shooting outside, I would end up, I don't often have to use ISO 3200. At the moment, I'm at f5, so I'm not going to get a very, big depth of field. So I'm going to have to be quite careful as to how I do the handheld stack. So, just another thing to note. Somebody asked about 1:1 there. I have set the camera. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see this, to the minimum focusing distance. So this is going to give me 1:1 magnification. Now, as you can imagine, if I've got that jumping spider on a fence and it's moving all around, you've got to get quite used to sort of instinctively getting the settings set up very, very quickly, so you can get down and you can photograph the subject. Obviously, I'm trying to sort of talk you through this, not with the best lighting conditions, with it going really, really bright outside, which is ironic because it's been really dull for about the last 5 days. So I'm now in a position, I've got everything set up, and I'm going to try and do the handheld stack. So over key settings, I need to put the camera onto what's called high speed continuous. So let me just check to see, let me get this really close in here, tilt that down a little bit. Yes, you guys can see the feather with the clamp. So I am going to do what I call fire in a blank. So what I literally mean by that is, if I'm out in the field and I've got my jumping spider with a fly and it's moving around, I will go in and try and get the shots to do the handheld stack. If the spider then moves, so I stop and I just carry on and try and do another stack, I'm going to end up with this long sequence of photographs where the spider has moved, and they're all going to look pretty similar. So what I do is I just take a picture of something which is completely and utterly different, and I then repeat the stack, if that makes sense. So that once I go back into the images, when I upload them into whatever software I'm going to use for the editing, I can clearly see where one stack finishes and one stack starts, if that makes sense. I hadn't actually thought that one through when I started doing this type of photography, so I'd get back, I might have taken several hundred images and they would all look really, really similar. It'd be really hard to work out where the next stack starts. So it's only a little tip, but it's very, very useful. So let's do the handheld stack. So I'm gonna, hopefully you can hear me here, I'm gonna sort of look at the subject and I'm gonna go backwards and forwards. So as I'm looking through the viewfinder and I'm going backwards and forwards, I can see different parts of the feather being in focus. So what I'm going to do is I've gone backwards, now it's just going out of focus. So I'm going to fire the burst. Bump. So, there I've just done the first handheld stack. So you probably think it didn't look like he was moving. Now, if you think with this type of macro photography, when you're at 1:1 magnification or even higher magnification, your depth of field goes further and further down. So literally, as I fired that burst, I probably only moved, I don't know, 2 to 4 to 5 millimeters at the absolute most. So let's just, this is what I would do in the field. I would fire a blank and then I would again go backwards and forwards. Let me just pick a different bit this time. So right, I'm going backwards and forwards. Now backwards, it's out of focus. Actually, let me just change angle a little bit. Just coming into focus. Bump. So, second stack done. So, and it's literally just as simple as that. So if I was, you know, when I'd found that jumping spider, it was really a case of waiting for the jumping spider to stop moving on the fence, locating the jumping spider through the viewfinder, and then, let me just move that over that way. Right, I'm going to shut the curtains again. Maybe actually put the that big print back in the way. There. Yeah, that's better. It's a bit higher. So the key thing is whether you're photographing a feather, a fly, a jumping spider, is, you know, when you're looking through the viewfinder, you know, sometimes people sort of say, you know, which bit should you have in focus first? I always go for the nearest bit in focus, but it's really for you as a photographer to decide how do you, you know, at which point do you want this image to start being in more focus? You know, there's no black and white rule where that you can really have on there. It's just up to you as a photographer to decide which bit do I want to get in focus to start with. You know, if I was photographing something like a fly or a dragonfly, I'd always want to make sure that the whole compound eye was in focus. But there's no right or wrong answer. There's no sort of set formula. This morning when I found the hoverfly, you know, you have to look at a situation and think, right, at what point do I want this image to start to be in focus, and at what point do I want it to stop being in focus as well? So now, one of the key things there was when I was photographing this feather there, I don't know if you noticed, I had my sort of elbows down, my hand holding the camera. So the jumping spider that I showed you before, that was on a fence. So I was using exactly the same technique using that fence. So holding everything steady, resting on the fence. This is a technique which, especially at the higher magnifications, I can only really use when I find subjects either on fences, fence poles, posts, walls, etc. If it's, I mean, I have done it when last year I spent some time in Ecuador, and I wasn't finding things on fences because there were no fences in the cloud forest. So sometimes I might find something on a plant. If it was something that I thought was going to move very quickly, I would sort of hadn't got time to set up a tripod and be really accurate, but I had got time to, you know, either get my camera bag down or just something that you can get there so you can rest the camera. Trying to do a handheld stack, just holding the camera like this, you know, there's gonna be way too much movement. So I have to have something to rest on. So let's take the images that were on this card. Right, let me try and get this in a place where the screen isn't going completely crazy. Let's move this round a bit. Come on, expose for the screen. Higher. Just bear with me, guys, just adjusting the tripod a little. Right, that's better. I'm going to have to work at a very funny angle here for you guys, but hopefully that looks a lot better on the screen. Drop that down a little bit. Right, that's looking a lot better. So, stick that in there. So I'm going to talk you through now what I do in terms of post-production. So I'm going to do this using Lightroom and Photoshop. There are many different ways of doing this. There's many different types of software. Yeah, I have Lightroom and Photoshop, so I'm just going to use those for this example. Right, we don't want to upload all of those hoverfly images again from this morning. I also found a bee covered in dew as well. That was pretty exciting. So here are the feather images that I took earlier. So there's the blank. Let's just make this full screen. There was the blank I fired, so we don't want that, but let's and there was the second blank. So I'm going to take those images and I'm going to import them into Lightroom. How are we doing for time? Oof, 7 minutes past 11. So let's just have a quick look at the images. So as you can see here on this one, only this tiny little bit of the feather here is in focus. And as I'm going through these images, it goes through these nice and quickly now because I've just done them in smaller JPEGs. So there I've got up to image 26. Now this section of the feather is in focus, and this section's in focus, that section's come out of focus. If I keep going through, now this edge of the feather is in focus, this top bit, all of this is out of focus. So, so I've just moved towards the subject really, really gradually, and that's changed the different parts of the feather which are in focus. As simple as that. It's like I mentioned before, yeah, sometimes stacking is seen as this complicated thing, but it's really, really quite simple. Somebody said about higher F number when you have more light. That is a really good question, and I am going to talk about that a little bit just for a second. Now, as you saw when I was photographing this feather, I've got a speaker behind me, I've got a hard drive unit, and I think that's probably the edge of the hard drive unit over there, but everything is really out of focus, and that's because I've shot this at f5 at minimum focusing distance, so my depth of field is very small. Now, if I could have used flash, say for example, which would have changed all of these natural colours, and I could have shot at say f14, but if I'd have done that, this line here would have become a hard line. If I'm like the hoverfly I was photographing this morning was among loads of grasses. Now, if I'd have, again, you know, if I'd have shot that at f14 and put more light onto it, it would have destroyed all of the reflections and refractions and the water drops, but also the grass in the background would have become really visible. So quite often with this, I am still using really wide apertures. Right, let me. So I'm not going to take all of these images, or this stack is going to take a long time. I am going to just take these 10 here. Make that smaller again. So what I'm just going to very quickly do is I'm just going to do a couple of little edits to it. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to enable profile correction, which basically just takes out any obvious faults with the lens. So it's the first thing I always do. I'm not really going to do a whole lot else. Maybe just push the exposure a tiny bit. Make the blacks a little blacker, the whites a little whiter. And then I am going to crop it. I don't need all of that grey area. And it makes the next bit a little bit quicker as well. So I've just made some slight edits to that first one. The next thing I'm going to do is, because I've got 10 images selected down here, is I'm going to sync the setting. Sync all of them. Click synchronize. So that's going to take the edits I took on that one image and then spread it across all 10. And then, so these are sort of the key bits. So I've got the 10 images highlighted in the film strip down here at the bottom. I'm going to right click those. I'm going to go to edit in. And this bit is really important. I'm going to go to open as layers in Photoshop. So click on that one. This is going to take a little while. So go over to Photoshop. Yeah, so this may take a minute or two, because what Photoshop is now basically going to do, it's going to load each one of those images, but as individual layers. Hopefully it shouldn't take too long. But while it's doing that, I noticed a question there about focus, etc. So yeah, basically all the focusing system on the camera is turned off. Me going backwards and forwards is what's moving the focal plane across the image. The lens I was using this morning when I was photographing the hoverflies, that has no, that is just a fixed focal point lens anyway. So you can't actually alter the focus system on that lens. But yeah, 90% of the macro photography I do, maybe 95%, the focus system isn't even turned on. So I'm gonna, what I've done here is, so here's the, here is one of the images. And in this box down here, it shows the individual layers. So I've just gone into here and I've highlighted all 10 of those layers. So if you imagine what Photoshop has done now is, as it's loaded these layers into Photoshop, it's like putting 10 pictures of the feather on top of one of each other. Because as carefully as I try to do that, as I move towards the feather, I will have been introducing some type of upwards and downwards and type movement. So the first thing we need to do is we need to align these images. So if I go to up here to the top left, edit, auto align, and then when you press auto align, you're going to get this dialog box pop up. You just click auto, make sure the auto is clicked, and then hit OK. So what Photoshop is doing now is, if you imagine you just put 10 photographs of a feather on top of each other, you've stacked them up, basically it's shuffling all of those 10 images around so all of the bits of the feather line up. And like I said, this is a live demonstration, so it may or it may not work. So hopefully it's going to work. Nearly done it. Now obviously when you're using full-size raw files, this does take considerably longer. Now, so what it's done now is Photoshop has just aligned all of this up, and you can see there's a tiny little bits of gap around the edge. Now that is a good sign. That means as I move towards the feather, I didn't waggle the camera around very much at all, so that's a good sign. So next stage, so we've aligned all of those images. I go back up to edit up here. I go to auto blend, and then that's going to bring up this dialog box up here, where you've got blend method, panorama or stack images. So we're stacking, so you make sure that the stack images button is checked, radio button's checked, and then underneath that there's a little one where there's a checkbox next to seamless tones and colours. You definitely do want that to be checked. Now you could, like I said, there's these little gaps around the edge. I could click the next one, which is content aware fill transparent areas, but it's just going to take more time, so I'll just click OK. So what Photoshop is doing now is it's running some clever algorithm type thing, which basically looks at the images and it tries to select all of the bits which are most in focus. How it does that, I have no real idea. But it is going to take a minute or so to do that, so if anybody has a question in the meantime, feel free to fire that out. And thanks for persevering with the harsh light that was coming through the window. Because when we did the one the other week, it was really much easier. Do you ever make copies of the layers before blending them to get a better clean up? I'm not sure what you mean there, actually. And sometimes I will edit them a little bit more. What version of Photoshop is it? This is the Creative Cloud version, so I'm a member of the Creative Cloud, so it's the latest version of Photoshop. But Photoshop has been able to stack it for quite some time. Somebody mentioned specialist focus stacking software. There is, yeah, Helicon's is a good one. There is another one which people use, which has gone just out of my mind as well. And you can trial those. You can trial those softwares as well, so you can sort of have a play around with them and see whether you want to use them. Tim, I have tried the Canon RP very briefly, because you're right, that has autofocus stacking feature in there. Quite a few of the modern cameras do. I'm just still a bit old school at the moment. So, all right, there we go. It has done it. So, and I could see instantly there, this has got a much bigger depth of field than what a single image does. I'm going to move this back into Lightroom in a minute, and I'll show you how that works. Zareen stacking, Kirsty, yeah, that is the other key software that people use. So, so what Photoshop has done now is it's created a whole load of different layer masks. You don't really need to worry about how it's done that, but that's what it's done. So you've got all 10 images, and it's basically sort of erased all the bits which are most out of focus and left a view of all the bits which are most in focus. But what it does do, and you're not going to be able to see this because the numbers are tiny, is it does create absolutely huge files. So this file, and bear in mind I was just using medium-sized JPEGs, and I only used 10 of the images out of the stack. is weighing in a massive 971.9 megabytes. So that they become huge files. Now obviously I do not want the file to be that big, and at the moment this is 10 images and so I don't need all that. So what I need to do is I need to flatten the image. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go back into the layers box over here, right click and flatten the image. Bump, so that's just turned into a single image. So it's now gone from 971 megabytes to just 60 megabytes. So it makes a massive, massive difference. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to shut that. I'm going to make sure I click save. And I'm going to go back into Lightroom. So what's happened here is Photoshop has just automatically saved that image in the right place, and it is now saved in the film strip. So here is the stacked version. Now if I just go one photo back, this is a single image. So let's just zoom into a bit try to work out which bit's most in focus here. If I go the other way, that might be easier. Yeah, so this is a single image. Come on. Yeah, so this bit is most in focus. If I go to the stacked image, then all of this comes in focus as well. So in essence, we have just done a handheld stack. All the way from the beginning through to the actual processing. So hopefully that sort of shows you how easy it actually is. It's really not that much of a difficult thing to do. I must remember to switch my camera back into RAW, because I did one of these demonstrations. Let me just move that back a little bit. I did one of these demonstrations a couple of weeks ago, and I had put the camera into medium-sized JPEG. I then went out the following day. I found this really cool robber fly, and it was all covered in dew. And anyway, I was then, because it was early in the morning, I was using a tripod. I took these photographs of it. I was really excited because it had literally loads of dew. It was the sort of most dewy robber fly I think I've ever found. I got back to work on the Mac and to process the files, and I realised the files uploaded really, really quickly into Lightroom. I thought that was a bit strange, and then the layers went really, really quickly into Photoshop, and then I was like, oh no, I've left it in medium JPEG, and it was quite a difficult subject, because when these insects are covered in dew, it's really hard not to overexpose the highlights, obviously because I'd shot in medium JPEG, all of the highlights were really blown out. So if you're practicing in this at home and you don't want to take up loads of space, and you move it out of RAW and into JPEG, if you're then photographing something really important, make sure you change it back to what you would normally use. So so that gets us to sort of the end point of there. How are we doing with time? 11:22. So now that I've covered everything I need to cover on the lesson side, really. So I'll have a look at some questions. So, Jonathan, where is the best place to find your subject? In fields or woods? Now, it really depends what you're looking for. Yeah, because we've talked about the complexities of, or really not complexities, how simple it is to do a stack. But an absolutely key part of macro photography is finding subjects. Because it doesn't matter how good you get your sort of camera skills and your technical skills, if you cannot find the subject, obviously you haven't got anything to photograph. So this morning when I said I got up just before 4 AM, had a coffee, grabbed the dog, I was driving specifically to a site where I've been many times before, and I know at the beginning to mid-June tends to be very good for robber flies. And interestingly, to the question you mentioned, fields or woods, this is a field next to a wood. So you are going to get different species in wooded areas than you are to fields, and different different species around ponds and on heathlands. And the key really is just to start exploring these places and going round them and trying to find subjects. You know, if I go around, I'll often go around places during the day to sort of try and see what's active, and then go first thing in the morning to try and find them when they're stable. So different environments provide different subjects. I saw somebody mention there about Rainex. Yes, basically you can use exactly the same technique with those. Basically anything that goes on the front of the lens which gives you extra magnification, you can use this technique. Anything with extension tubes, or like with the MP65 that I showed earlier. But I mean, stacking is a technique. I mean, I got asked by Canon last year to talk at the photography show, and they wanted me to talk about how I've used stacking in different genres. So I've used stacking when I've used it in portrait photography, I've used it in pet photography, I've used it in landscape photography. It is basically just a technique to increase your depth of field. Now there's no right or wrong answer as to whether you should have an increased depth of field or not. It all depends on what you're trying to create as a photographer. An example of where it wouldn't work though is if we run back to when we did the demo the other week and we were photographing the soap films and all the soap was moving around like this, and that's a situation where stacking, you know, is probably not going to get you the results that you want because things are moving. I saw somebody ask about can you use flash? Yeah, absolutely you can use flash. I don't tend to use flash that much myself anymore. That's just because I found it sort of changes the colours of things a little bit. You get flash drop off. Things like jumping spiders can often jump, etc. Any tips on lighting rigs flash? Just where is it? Hopefully I've not crunched it with my improvised light blocker. If I am using flash, I use one of these, which is a Canon MTX24EX, and there's two little flashes which connect to the front of the lens, but it's a whole nother topic is flash. I mean, it's you could do a whole hour on that. But one of the key things I've found is if you are using flash is you need to use some type of homemade diffusion, because flash in itself is super harsh. Let me pop that down. Move that back across. I'm quite glad when I'd forgotten the flash unit was down there, so when I put that big heavy print down there, I didn't end up crunching my flash unit. So, Peter West portrait. One of my most interesting stacked images I ever did was I work in last 6 years I've been working in Sweden during the winter time, and I had gone out with a long lens, a 500mm lens, and I was trying to photograph moose down a track. There was 3 moose, a female moose and 2 young moose, and the 2 young moose had run away. Then, to cut long story short, a friend was walking down the track, and I had an image with this big giant female moose looking at him, and I wanted the moose to be in focus and the person to be in focus because he had his head in his hands, and I'm using a 500mm, so I couldn't have both in focus. So I took 2 images, one where I had moved the focus point onto the moose and one where I'd moved the focus point onto the person, and then I'd stacked those 2 images together. So that's just a really unusual time as when you would use stacking. So it's a technique which is commonly used in macro photography, but can be useful in other genres as well. Excellent. Well, that's probably 11:28. So I will stay here for another couple of minutes. So if people have got any other questions. Yeah, extension tubes are a really good thing. If anybody, they can turn a normal lens into a pseudo macro lens. They mean, you know, if I'm using an extension tube with my 1:1 macro lens, you know, it gives me about 1.6 times magnification, so they're a really good tool. Just be aware though, when you start doing more high magnifications, the higher magnification you do, the more that increases your problems. So you know, we were talking about the general rule of thumb. If you're using a 50mm, you can get away with 1/50th. So if I'm using a macro lens and it's a 100mm macro lens, and then all of a sudden I stick some extension tubes on, so I've got 2 times extension, then you know, I would need, you know, following the same rule of thumb, I'd need at least a 200th of a second. So any movement as well, any lateral movement, etc. Again, all of those problems magnify. So if you are starting out with it, I would start at no more than 1:1 magnification, and then just keep going. So yeah, that's a good tip. No, I've never used filters to reduce light outside, but sometimes I would use, if it's bright sunshine, I would use some diffusion paper. Right, guys. Excellent. Well, it's 11:30, so cheers for bearing with me with some of the technical issues we've had with the light today. I'm not quite sure why it's been so savage, but I'm glad that a number of you have bared with me through that. Congratulations to the winners from the soap film competition. A massive thanks to CameraWorld and Canon for inviting me on here today. We'll make sure the video is saved, and we will make sure any sort of questions that got answered get covered off. So, you know, hope you get a chance to practice this. It's a really fun technique that you can use, and yeah, hopefully see you soon. Cheers, bye for now.